kiss for you.
Recently, with the Helldivers 2 news talking about the irritation that a lot of players had with the nerfs that keep happening, as well as some other complaints, I just kind of was thinking the fact that a lot of these live service games tend to get worse over time. Not all of them do, but it really does feel like majority of live service games eventually become much worse over time. Helldivers 2 obviously launched a very good success in that. They had obviously a big thing when the PSN account requirement, and it got banned from 180 countries or some very large number, and that was obviously a slip up, but that was more on Sony. This is more so on the developers. It is the fact that a lot of the most recent updates have been doing things like adding more fog, making it harder to see for no reason, as well as nerfing a bunch of weapons to make them not very fun, adding in stratagems that aren't that useful and more so just take up space. All those things are things that people have complained about and more frustrated with, and the CEO also talks about it, the fact that, a bunch of these things that aren't doing well and making the game annoying aren't really being addressed, and he talks about that and the issue with too many nerfs that keep happening, and sort of this realization that this game, which launched at a very good state and a very fun state and a state that people really enjoyed, is getting worse over time. The PSN thing happens, this update happens that people aren't really, interested in. The nerfs keep happening, right? And so you start to see this thing slip. Now, this isn't a disastrous example, but it's one of the examples where why does it feel like every live service game eventually gets way worse? You see that with things like Destiny, right? Largest player drop, Lightfall, was a disaster as it came out. Witch Queen was good, Lightfall came down, Final Shape was really good, the best expansion ever, supposedly, and yet people are dropping off of Destiny in a massive way. They just lost like 30% of their company and all that, and the article talks about it, right, and how the numbers happen and the player count percentages, and you see that the Final Shape had the lowest amount. And something like Lightfall had the highest amount, and Lightfall was, relatively speaking, a pretty poor expansion for a lot of people. You have this issue where stuff like Destiny 2 over time, I'm not super familiar with that game, but I can say that, people are pretty mad about what's happening there and the layoffs and stuff, even though they made a phenomenal, to a lot of people, expansion. It's not enough to save them, and overall, the things that Destiny's doing and the power creep and player creep and complexity creep and all that are getting to it. So I would say, generally speaking, that makes Destiny 2 worse over time. Apex Legends, they had two major controversies. One was a little bit smaller, canceling the mobile client and all that. But the bigger one was the fact that in Season 22, they were changing how the Battle Pass worked. So basically, instead of it being something you could buy with Apex coins originally at $10, it's now 2 of them per season, $10 each, so that's $20, and you couldn't buy it with coins. They reversed that, so now you can buy it with coins, but it's still that same issue, where you have a $10 one for half a season and another $10 one or a $20 one. So now you can pay up to $40 a season instead of $20 a season, doubling the potential cost of the Battle Pass, just for them to go back on some of those changes. I'm trying to get the chart up here. Let's see. Yeah, this disastrous thing. So this is, let's see if I can, this is the Battle Pass that everyone was talking about, right? You have the free version, the premium version, which coins, right? The Ultimate Edition and the Ultimate Plus Edition. This Premium Edition is still going to be with coins, but then there's Ultimate Plus that gives you a little bit more stuff. I'm not sure how this works, but you can only buy it, right? So instead of just scrapping it all together, they said, okay, instead of only being able to buy it, we have an option for you to pay for Apex coins, but it's again only going to be half a season, so 2 of these, $20. You can technically grind for these coins, but it's still, right? But we're going to add in one that is better, should be what the premium one is, but you can only buy it. So effectively, it's just saying, okay, we'll give you what you want, but also add more things you can buy, add more annoyances. It's like, okay, fine, you want to do this, we're still going to force this other one on you if you actually want what we should have been giving you in the first place, but now you have, right? It's not really an update or a backpedal, it's more so just another option, and then they add an Ultimate Plus that gives you more for 20 that you can only, pay for, right? A disaster all around. Apex, again, launched in a pretty good state, and now it's here, right? It's going down. And also Fortnite, right? Fortnite, you may say, okay, they're ones that mostly avoided all this problem. They added a Fortnite Club, which on top of the Battle Pass is a monthly subscription that gives you the Battle Pass plus a bunch of other crap, right? It's like a $12 a month monthly subscription. Then, when they decided to do the whole, Unreal for Fortnite thing, they did Fortnite Festival and Rocket Racing. Both of those have their own battle passes you can buy as well, and also the kind of the segregation between the game that was originally meant for Battle Royale and a more Roblox-style kid creator-focused game. Those aren't necessarily bad things, but it's generally a pretty big departure from where it started, and it's definitely worse in a lot of people's eyes because of what it's starting to become. And so we have a bunch of examples here of games just slowly and very quickly becoming worse over time. The reason I believe this tends to happen is, especially from a development perspective, right? Because I haven't, done games in a big sense, but I've developed a couple games and worked with a couple teams on some, larger projects. And what you end up doing is really just, I think, getting decision fatigue. You may say, oh, it's the shareholders all asking money and stuff. But the best way I could describe, I think a good example is Apex. Apex, while it is a very popular game, is not necessarily increasing the amount of money it's gaining. It's relatively stable in terms of player base, and so if those players are not spending more money, it's getting a consistent, let's just theoretically say $150 million, right? I don't know, I'm not going to look into it, but it's just kind of like, let's say it's 150 mil. And that's pretty stable because the players aren't really increasing. Let's say you have a new season, it's not really going to increase the amount that you're expecting to get overall. The development, however, does increase in price. You're not going to get the same development amount that you would typically. Let's say we have 150 million right there, and that's pretty consistent over time. And let's just say this is like 2020. And you're going to get 150 million pretty over time, not really going to increase, because unless you're adding some drastic thing that gives you more money all of a sudden, you're not really going to be gaining a ton of value from from extra players, right? If players aren't coming in, if the game is pretty stable, you're not going to be getting a ton of value. And so you're pretty much stuck with the same amount of money every single year. And, maybe inflation happens, but inflation tends to not hit things like battle passes, right? A lot of the time you see battle passes and other things not increasing their price with inflation. However, the cost to develop items for the game does, especially if you're trying to attract new players. You're going to be trying new things. Apex, for example, when it added the 3v3 arena mode, right? I don't think that arena mode ended up doing that well, but I tried to, do something set Battle Royale to kind of get people back in the game. That cost more money than a typical season that wouldn't have that in there, right? But your amount here is pretty much staying the same over and under depending on the player base. Your cost to develop on top of the initial, let's just theoretically say it was $100 million to develop, and then we're going to add an extra $50 million a year. All of a sudden, that $50 million a year not only keeps adding up year over year when you're not getting more money, but could increase an extra 20, 25 million, let's just theoretically say, for increases in wages from people that you're paying, to increases of ideas, maybe server infrastructure changes, maybe you have to change because the host you're using, right, if you're using a third party, there's a whole bunch of options. But generally speaking, the development of these things increases over time, and unless you're gaining new players due to the content you're adding, this stays the same. So you have to start figuring out what you're going to do to attract more people. And so that, from the shareholder perspective, they're going to add in, more expensive battle passes. That's just, what they're going to do. And to us, that's a horrible decision, but to them, it's like the thing they need to do in order to continue keeping the game online. The reason choice fatigue starts to get involved is because it's ultimately the decision of the developers how to implement a lot of these things. The higher-ups may say, hey, we need you more expensive battle passes, right? And then the developers have to figure, okay, how can I give value with these more expensive passes? What can we do, but what can we add? So what you end up seeing is this choice fatigue. I don't want to listen to every single choice. Every single person's talking to me and giving me feedback on a game I'm developing. That's tiring. That's not super productive. If a game is just being built on the feedback of others, it doesn't have a clear vision for what it's going for. And so you see a lot of that, especially in Helldivers here, where they're giving a lot of info, a lot of feedback, all that, and they're trying to take it all in, and obviously some stuff has to get scrapped, and things have to move around. It's really a choice fatigue of the live service kind of setup. When you're set up as a live service and you have to keep going feedback over and over again for a game that you're developing, eventually the pool of money you have here is going to run out. And the choices that not audience, but the people that play the game might be more and more. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had an entire new faction or an entire new playable character, or like 7 new, right? All these other things. Your development budget is not increasing, and yet the demands of the players over time for the game is. Just because the game, you could sunset like Destiny does, but generally speaking, a live service game doesn't get rid of content after a long time. It just keeps adding, right? And so all of a sudden, you keep adding. The stuff you had before no longer works as well. That's kind of something we see with Final Fantasy XIV, right? The Dawn Trail expansion wasn't doing as well because it was just basically the same thing that people felt in Endwalker, and it was kind of just like a reset of what people felt in Endwalker, and so it didn't really do that much for people, and so you kind of see like, okay, if you're doing more and more and more, and you're not changing it up like Final Fantasy XIV wasn't doing, you're gonna suffer. And as you can see, the scores do suffer, right? It's at a 52% like this game, 6 out of 10 on Steam, 3 out of 5 in Eurogamer, right? IGN scored an 8. But like really, these scores are much lower than Endwalker, which was a pretty good expansion for most people. When you end up doing the same thing over and over, you get Dawntrail, right? Relatively speaking, not a success. If you don't do that over and over again, and you try and add new things and try and do crazy stuff like that, what you end up getting is the Fortnite approach. You end up needing some other way to facilitate that development. So you're gonna, do crazier things. Get a Fortnite club, get a Fortnite festival in there, get the rocket racing, get all these other options you can do to monetize what you're doing. And so when your only options are do Fortnite and just create this giant behemoth of constantly revolving revenue sources, or continue down the path you keep doing, and both of these, for the most part, seem to be kind of faltering a little bit. But which one's more successful? I would say Fortnite is more successful than Final Fantasy XIV, especially right now where Final Fantasy XIV has been doing the same thing it's been doing for a while and not seeing as much success. Fortnite, for all of the issues that we might see in that diversification model, is doing really well with it, right? People are playing Festival and Lego Fortnite and all these other things. And so a lot of companies are looking at it, it's like, okay, what do we do? Do we continue down the path we've been doing? Is that going to work? Or do we have to diversify? And most companies and most investors and developers are going to say, let's diversify. That's what the players want. We can see it in games like Fortnite. Live source model diversification works pretty well. So that's what they try and do, right? In the case of Helldivers, it doesn't work as well because there's some other fundamental things they need to get right first. But that's kind of the way it sort of sets up here. And so the reason that these live service games tend to have this seasonal rot feeling is because when you're faced with choice fatigue, you have to start figuring out how to break through. And a lot of the time, people are going to either break through by just staying the course and doing what they've been doing, and okay, it's working. We're gonna, try and just keep it going. Maybe, add some more expansion content so people can kind of, increase the player count and all that. People like this stuff. They're gonna tune back in for more of it. Or you do the Fortnite model and just try and hit everyone, right? We have racing here. We have, music here. We have hide and seek here. We have prop hunt here. We have Battle Royale here, right? And so a lot of companies end up going this model. The issue, as we talked before, not only is this model hard to do because not everyone's a Fortnite, but it results in other revenue sources being needed to be made up. Club Fortnite and the battle passes and the Fortnite Festival and rocket racing need to exist because that development cost of diversification requires a lot of money that, as we talked about, they're not necessarily getting. And so you end up with more monetization and worse decision making and all that stuff. Hopefully all that made sense. That's just kind of my perspective and what I've been thinking about it. But I think that generally speaking makes sense when I've seen from how these games tend to operate. So hopefully people found that useful.